Hello everyone and welcome to the Healthtech Pigeon podcast, where we take a look at the best health tech stories of the week every single week. Today I'm really pleased to be joined by Belle from SomX and Tim Horton from the Health Foundation. We're going to do something a little bit different today. We're still going to touch on some of the stories, but it's been a really exciting week in healthcare AI, and we've come off the back of, I think it's the Health Foundation's first ever AI summit. With some fantastic speakers, some fantastic guests, and even, I guess, more interesting, some fantastic talking points. So before we get, too deep into everything, Belle, Tim, how have your weeks been?
Thanks, Huw. It's been a very busy week for us at the Health Foundation. As you said, we've had a big summit yesterday looking at the potential of AI in healthcare, where we were joined by Karen Smith, the new government minister who's responsible for health technology and data, including AI. So we were busy preparing for that, and had a really good day yesterday, but glad to get to the end of the week too and be with you here.
Fantastic, yeah, and obviously the end of the week can't come soon enough, but it's been a good one, and really enjoyed yesterday's event. Belle, how about you?
Nothing as exciting to report at my end. I've not gone to any of the nice events this week. But yeah, I'm super excited to hear about what you've got to say and obviously how that links to some of the news stories this week. I obviously love talking about AI, and there's some things here which kind of tap into themes that I love as well, such as virtual care, women's health. So can't wait to dig in.
Well, I mean, we're going to get on to some really good stories. There's some really exciting stuff we've got coming up. But Tim, I guess the kind of core for me on this one this week is looking at the Health Foundation's work on AI. You've published a lot of reports over the last, I think it must be 3 months. There's some fantastic things out there. What are the technologies that are actually saving time? What tech is actually working in the NHS? Most recent one we featured and already discussed on Pigeon, but it's great to have one of the team behind it on, which is a strategy for AI in healthcare, and I think that's what I'd love to discuss today. So before we go deep into some of the kind of issues at stake and some of the talking points from yesterday, tell us why now? What's the kind of challenge that a Health Foundation is seeking to address, and what's the kind of basis of the work?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, over the last few years at the Health Foundation, we found ourselves working more and more on the area of health tech and data and the potential this offers for the NHS and healthcare systems all around the world. That potential is growing and growing. Thinking is a year ago where we had that explosion of interest following, I guess, ChatGPT-4, but in what the latest large language models can do. And particularly with AI now, it's feeling like there's a real moment, if you want. In the UK, the NHS is under such pressure at the moment. It's got persistent workforce shortages, long waiting lists, and money's tight, and demand for healthcare is increasing. And it's sometimes hard to see a way out of that. And I think technology and AI are one of those things that potentially offer not a quick fix and not an alternative for recruiting enough staff and investing in the health service properly, but do offer a way to support the healthcare workforce try and deal with some of those pressures. So it feels like there's a real moment now where there's rising interest in health tech and particularly AI. And what we've noticed as a foundation, we fund a lot of innovation and improvement. And we're looking around and we're seeing really good work going on AI in healthcare around the UK. We're seeing good initiatives going on within government, but they're all quite disparate and fragmented and feel like they're not really, if you want, adding up to more than the sum of their parts. And something we were trying to do at this summit yesterday was call for a dedicated strategy on AI in healthcare. We think it's a moment where if we can get a grip on this, if we can get agreement across the different players in the system, what the priorities are, if we can get some of the agencies involved collaborating a better and consistency across them, there's a chance to go further forward and make further progress there. So that's what we were focusing on yesterday. We were really delighted. I mean, there's kind of huge interest in it. We had a couple of hundred people there yesterday, but a couple of thousand joining us online. I guess just showing the kind of energy there is around it, and I guess a community of people wanting it to work. So that's really why we were trying to focus on the need to get a kind of overarching strategy, a kind of agreed focus, and more clarity and consistency for everyone working in this field.
Completely, and I completely take your point about the kind of sort of fragmented things here and there. That we've seen those announcements over the last 18 months now. Sort of 18 million here, 30 million for that. Sort of vague. It'll be in this space, but this one might be for this number of trusts, or in this particular area. And there's been a lot of it, hasn't there?
Absolutely. And look, I mean, it's all really good stuff. I think for us as a country in the UK, we're not the US, where the National Institute of Health can spend tens of billions each year. We've got a limited number of resources. There's a chance if we can agree some really promising areas, some key areas to focus, and if we can target everyone's limited bandwidth and resources better, there really is a chance to make progress on potentially some key priorities. But that does require the kind of players involved coming together and thinking, without squeezing out, in addition to all of the local innovation that will always be going on all the time, where can government and industry, academia, civil society, where can we make most difference if we can agree some key areas of focus?
So for me, this is just one very slight thorn in this that I can't quite reconcile, and I think it was touched upon quite a bit at the summit, which is an AI strategy is absolutely valuable. I think there's so much that's up in the air and some of the questions that are up in the air, but do we need a tech strategy first? Because there's a lot, it's really unclear how a lot of it, scales, adopts. There's the technologies that are more basic isn't the right word, but using sort of different approaches, different technologies in there that could have a really, really impactful effect on the NHS and healthcare more widely that don't rely on AI. And we're struggling to bring them in as much as we are, the fancy new generative AI tools.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And of course, AI is a subset of health technology, where, as you said, there are real challenges. I mean, you could go one level up and say health technology itself is a type of innovation, but there are other kinds of innovations. And actually, there's work to do for us in the UK to get the ecosystem right for innovation in healthcare, whether that's investment or how you scale things up. So definitely challenges exist on all of those levels. But I guess what we were trying to say is AI in healthcare presents some specific challenges, some really specific challenges that we think need a dedicated focus. So, for example, issues of regulation and accountability. Something we hear from the clinicians we work with a lot is this anxiety about who's accountable if stuff goes wrong. Is it the person using a tool? Is it the person who designed it, manufactured it? We've seen that debate, haven't we, play out with driverless vehicles at the moment. Who's responsible if something goes wrong? And so regulation's one area. Evaluation's another one where AI presents some real challenges, because now it's not just you got a product, you test it, does it work or not, and then you can press a button. AI is usually based on algorithms that can adapt and therefore change over time. So how do you monitor that performance? A lot of people yesterday were focusing on some kind of dry phrase, post-market surveillance, but this idea that we're going to need systems for continuing to watch the performance of these things. It's not just a case of evaluating them up front. Or you've got like generative AI, where you could use it for different purposes. You could use something for a purpose that it wasn't originally intended for. How do we deal with that? So AI is posing some specific challenges as well that we think they'll benefit from a dedicated focus. Of course, that's not to say that there aren't challenges with technology in general. including getting the infrastructure, the IT and the data infrastructure that needs to underpin good AI right as well. So, totally agree with you, Huw.
It's a great answer, because that's, I guess that is the challenge we've got to work out, is sort of where are the differences between innovation, technology, AI. First question sort of back then is, there's a lot of discussion about sort of listening to the market, rather than necessarily have the market lead the conversation as well. So how do we make that happen? Because that's a key part, just about bringing in, what are the problems that we have. I had a nice sort of quiet conversation in one of the refreshment breaks yesterday with a number of people working in the innovation field, and it's sort of, there's a lot of initiatives to bring tech in, and bring AI in along with this sort of strategy, but there's still perhaps a lack of leadership from the centre on this. So, how do we bring that "what is the challenge" piece into a strategy?
That is just like the fundamental question, isn't it? Because the risk, if we don't think about that as a question, is you'll get industry developing a lot of tech, a lot of good tech, no doubt, but then voila, that has to be the solution, and you're into a system of people trying to sell stuff in to the NHS and persuade others that it has to be the solution. A better way of doing it is going to involve us understanding more the problems that NHS providers, hospitals, GPs, NHS staff on the ground, and of course, patients, carers, families are facing. And to be honest, finding better ways of aggregating that intelligence and that demand, and signalling that demand to industry. And I think, the centre, if you want, government or national agencies and organisations do have a valuable role to play in doing that. Ideally, we need good horizon scanning of what's coming out of industry, but we need good demand signalling back to industry of the kind of issues that the health service is facing and that they need help with. So there's definitely a chance to get better at that. Over the last year, we've been doing a bit of work with some of the Royal Colleges in the UK. These are the professional representative bodies for different kinds of healthcare professionals, asking some of their members about the challenges they face and the types of tech that could make a difference for them. And to be honest, that was a real eye-opener. If you open the papers, as you guys do regularly, or look on TV, you often see a lot of excitement about kind of niche clinical technology, a new type of medicine, a new kind of treatment. What we heard a lot from the staff we've been working with this year is the importance for them of tech that helps them with quite mundane admin and operational stuff, and frees up their time. They were saying these kinds of technologies, even things as simple as like video conferencing, like we're doing now, or digital messaging tools for messaging each other, were making the biggest difference for them in saving time, rather than really cutting edge, futuristic, niche clinical technologies. So actually, reflecting on that engagement, what we heard a lot is it's sometimes tech to help with very mundane run-of-the-mill stuff that is going to be moving the needle. Yet, when you look at where stuff gets invested, of course, everyone wants to cure cancer. Everyone wants to make progress on major diseases we're all concerned about. That there's less attention to, producing letters in the NHS, scheduling appointments, planning rosters, all of that. But that's what we heard was really moving the needle for staff. The stuff that takes time, right? It's the stuff that shouldn't take time. And there's a wonderful anecdote from yesterday's event of the 10 minute for the consultation and the 30 minutes going around looking for a printer. But I mean, it's a really good, challenge. And I like the idea of going to sort of talk to some of the bodies representing different groups within the NHS, because obviously we work with a lot of health tech companies selling into the NHS, selling in at different levels, and even as much as the buyer and the user can have quite different priorities. And
addressing those and, determining what gets bought and by whom and what problem you're actually trying to solve is quite challenging, right?
Absolutely. And in a complex service like the NHS, particularly where you've got very big providers like large hospitals, it adds another layer to that, Huw, I think, because very often a person making a decision, probably working in a procurement office, is different from the people who will be using the technology. It's not like your classic innovation theory where you take an innovation to market and the user buys it. The decision to buy and the decision to and the challenge of using are done by different people, and it makes it even more important. There's this understanding there, and the kind of chemistry of the system's right in getting this work. There's also the challenge, I guess, underpinning all of this of just how the NHS can work better with industry. On health tech, AI in particular, that's going to be really key, getting that coalface right, so that the health service is getting tech it needs and is confident about the effectiveness and safety of that and the post-market arrangements, but also that innovators in industry have confidence as they're developing technology in what's going to be asked of them, that it's clear, that it's not constantly changing, that it's got easy routes into the system. So that was another thing we heard at the summit yesterday. There's still work to do at that coalface to get that right.
Is it a fundamental blocker then to sort of some of these grand challenges, these big missions of using AI to solve cancer? If right now the kind of things that are saving people time are Zoom or MS Teams or we've got a lot more time to save, obviously.
Sure. I mean, look, it's not a blocker, and all that work going on AI and cancer and in that medical space more generally is, of course, critically important. I suppose, though, if we're thinking what's going to help the NHS get through the next few years, it's not going to be something that's coming over a kind of sunlit horizon in 15 years' time. It will be absolutely helping staff with admin, freeing up their time in the here and now. Often better use of existing technologies, as well as the new things that are coming down the pipeline. So, yeah, it's not a blocker, but what's gonna save the NHS over the next few years isn't the most exciting new developments in genomics that I'm reading about in Time magazine. It is, as you say, better communication, better help with admin, and things that can free up staff to care for patients and improve services.
Cool. I guess a lot of it is just sort of avoiding people feel like they're, having innovation done to them, right? It's, how do you bring people along that journey? And it's the cohesion point that you sort of raised earlier, is that how do buyer, user, admin staff, clinician, just, I guess, bring a cohesive market signal together that industry can then react to it?
Yeah, I mean, it is I was going to say $64 million question, $64 billion question, probably, because ultimately the benefits of tech aren't just coming from the gadget or the kit, but from the successful use of it. And that ain't going to happen unless, as you say, Huw, that the people who are going to use it, whether that's health and care workers, whether it's patients, are involved in the discussion about how it's designed and how it's used. And something we heard at this summit yesterday, we had Rachel Power there, who is the chief executive of the Patients Association, who was talking very powerfully about the importance of involving the public and patients in the conversation about the way tech is changing healthcare, and in helping get right the way we're applying tech to healthcare to make it better. I mean, just let me give you a small example. We in that work we're doing with the Royal Colleges, we were looking at tech that might free up staff time. But we also asked them, what would you do with that freed up time? Because a lot of the policy agenda is assuming, oh, great, we can free up an hour of time, that will mean 4 more consultations. Actually, what we heard from staff is, yes, we'd use it on patient care, but we'd also use it on training, on management, on admin. We probably use it for reducing our overtime as well. So it's showing you the complex context of freeing up time and how we'll only get kind of benefits we want as a system if everyone's engaged in talking not just about the technology, but how it's going to be used and part of a system where we derive those benefits. So having the space to do that well is the holy grail in a way. I totally agree.
Something I was going to add is we talk about a lot about the idea of developing impactful solutions and then the challenges of selling that into health systems and things. And Tim, you've hit upon so many really, really crucial and critical points here. One of which I think is that it's not just about getting buy-in from the clinicians, from the hospital management, for whoever is making those decisions. It's the best solution in the world could be shown to with evidence to free up a ton of time and be really impactful across a health system. But if that solution has a really big onboarding time, then that's going to be a real blocker to it. So it's the case that sometimes a little bit of, activation energy or whatever to get to that better solution is going to be worth it. And a doctor can see that and be like, okay, yeah, I'll spend half an hour just learning this, setting it up, and then I can just get to it straight away and see that impact. But more often than not, especially if it requires change at a system level or a trust level or something wider, you're not going to get people using the best solution in the world if there's too much of a barrier to entry. So that's why these conversations with clinicians and the users are so vital, because how do they carry out their work? Does it slot into their current framework? Are they going to have to change their other processes to use that technology? Because that's when things don't get used and really impactful technology doesn't make the impact that we hope it would.
That's absolutely right. I mean, we've at the Health Foundation, we've been supporting and funding innovation over a long number of years. And what you've just described, Belle, is just the kind of key lesson you see coming out of it, which is that, as we said, it's not just the tech; it's the change that's involved, redesigning your workflows, ensuring the culture's right to use it, and that requires a change management process. It sounds mundane, but often very small amounts of resource, like clinical backfill to allow staff to step outside of their jobs and try something out first before putting it in place, or just a little bit of data collection, obviously training, whatever. Sometimes for want of quite small resources on that, you see things going wrong, which could unlock big gains. So yes, it's an area that requires some, that, as you said, there's a hurdle to clear to do that. It requires some investments to get this right, but it's not tens of millions or tens of billions of pounds. Often it's quite small amounts of resource to do that process right. But unless you do that, you see technology not delivering the benefits that are intended.
I guess it's a funny time in many ways, because we're at this precipice of AI technology, it's booming and there is so much potential and everyone can see it, and they know that we are just that next generation of how we interact with technology it's just there. We can feel it coming. 10 years time, the way we interact with technology is going to be so different. And AI is going to play a crucial role. What that will look and feel like, we're not quite sure yet, but it's there, you can feel it. And then that's happening at the same time, whereas in the UK health system and health systems across the world, just this intense pressure and overcapacity and waiting lists, and everyone wants the change, we want to usher it in, but they're just so busy. And the priority always has to be, how do we give the best care to our patients? So it's a really interesting time to be in healthcare and AI and technology, because you can just see it waiting to happen. Yeah, the other thing I just wanted to quickly mention, because Tim, you mentioned it right at the beginning of you talking, and I've made some notes, but you were having a great chat, so I didn't want to interject, is this idea of like what is powering the technology and stuff. Because I think that for clinicians who are very evidence-based, they've gone through a very long training process, they're used to being able to say, XYZ means this, like being able to make decisions based on the data in front of them. Suddenly being asked to potentially rely on an AI tool which has that black box is a big ask. And for AI that's developed in a very open way, then that's less of a problem, where you can point to these algorithms were trained on these data sets, this is what it does, and this is how it processes it, this is how it learns. But for Gen AI in particular, where you're often relying on these mammoth data sets which are developed elsewhere, and then you're using that for your own purposes, that's a bit of a funny one, because people don't really, like, I don't think anyone knows exactly what ChatGPT is trained on and things like that. And then being able to use that in a clinical scenario raises so many questions, which are, I mean, regulators and lawyers, I'm sure as well, are going to have a field day over the next few years with this. And it'll be so interesting when we see the first cases go to court of, like you said earlier, who is responsible for these decisions? Is it the developers who have developed technology with biases in it, that ultimately is developed to look and seem human? As we've already seen, their end goal is not to create true or even correct answers. It's just to make something feel human. And then being able to use that to something which needs evidence and has a very, very, very real impact on people's lives. It's a big like chasm to cross. I think it's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, so many issues there. And I think healthcare is really showing the importance, the seriousness of that issue, about the representativeness of the data sets that these AI models are trained on, whether they're developed in one country and then used in other countries, whether they're trained and developed using a population that is representative of the target population. So we're often seeing that play out with, for example, ethnic or racial inequalities and biases in the data sets on which these tools have been trained. Yesterday at our summit, we had a really interesting case. I had a pediatric radiologist on my panel who said, all this stuff to do with AI image analysis, yes, it's brilliant, but it's all for adults. It's been developed for adults. Children aren't getting the benefit of that yet. So, yeah, it's such an important issue. Who we're developing AI for, the representativeness of the data sets they're trained on, and avoiding the biases and the very real errors and harm that could come with that if they're not used in the right way.
All of this gives me one really big pause for thought, which is the whole, I mean, even as we look at, is AI the answer? I think someone raised a wonderful point yesterday is, why use AI when a simple statistical model would save you a lot of faff? And, Belle, you raised the kind of precipice. We don't know what we're going to be looking at in 10 years. And that, I guess, also brings in the skills conversation as well, which I thought was a really, great discussion yesterday. And I think Susan was the pediatric radiologist who also brought up the question of how it changes not just the task and what elements of the task that a clinician is doing, but also the tasks that the clinician must do at any given time, not just from a tech perspective or a clinical perspective, but working with patients, that radiology tech that now has to explain that the AI has found something and they need to book them in for another test is workflow-wise, just pure workflow-wise, it's great because it means the patient doesn't have to go home immediately. They can book them in right then. They don't have to wait for something because the AI has found something. They're now faced, however, with having to have that awkward conversation, that quite difficult conversation that they would never have had to beforehand. So I guess all of that is in the round to say we're moving very quickly, and from a regulatory perspective, from a skills perspective, how do we know? How do we know what we're going to be looking at in 5 years? We can There's the old adage of regulators are always 5 years behind anyway.
Yeah. And if that was the case anyway, with the speed at which AI is moving, I mean, 3 years ago, LLMs. We heard yesterday from Professor Zach Cohane from Harvard, and he was saying 3 years ago, large language models couldn't pass a medical test. Now they can, and the speed at which things are improving is itself quickening. So keeping up is incredibly difficult. And yeah, nowhere did you see that more than in that skills conversation. Further to what Belle was saying, staff are thinking, what are the skills I need to oversee the use of one of these tools responsibly? How do I question its outputs? How do I explain why it's saying something? And how do I use it effectively? And then what you were alluding to, Huw, in that it's freeing them up from some aspects of the job. It's then allowing health and care workers to do what humans do best, which is interacting with patients, and very often those more patient-facing aspects of care. And for some roles, that's going to require more skills, so not more tech skills, but more interpersonal skills, more skills at negotiating or helping people navigate systems and so on and so forth. So there's both the skills that staff will need to oversee and use tech properly, but also the new skills they'll need because tech's freeing them up from some historic aspects of their work to add more value in other areas. So it's just a huge challenge. And just coming back to your speed point, it's all very well changing curricula and student education, but things are changing every year, every 2 years. So this is going to be about continuing professional development for people already in the system. It's not a generational thing and how we're training today's students. It's what everyone needs to know next year and the year after, and having the right the right kind of agile system in place to do that.
That'll be a very interesting one, again, for the professional bodies as well, to look at from the CPD perspective and how they bring that in. That's
totally
a really interesting one. We've obviously chatted a lot of challenges, but I don't think any of us would be on this call if we weren't health techno optimists. And I think that probably showed in the room yesterday when you showed that ongoing poll and survey of how optimistic we were about the tech and AI ability to, I guess, change our jobs for the better. I'm not going to make you spoil any upcoming data that you might be sharing, but do you want to trail sort of the kind of things that you're working on in terms of looking at that side of things?
Yeah, I mean, we believe that getting tech right, particularly getting AI right, is going to mean that new uses of technology command the support of the public and patients and staff. And that involves understanding what they think of technology and, as we were saying, involving them in that conversation about the design and use of technology. And to help with that, the Health Foundation investigates public and staff attitudes to health tech and data. And this year, because it's a hot topic, we put in a module on AI, and we'll be publishing the results of that survey in a couple of weeks. This is a survey of 7,000 members of the UK public and 1,300 NHS staff. But as you mentioned, Huw, one of the things we asked them, really as a kind of barometer of people's sentiment, I don't want to suggest that these questions have simple answers, but if you had to say whether AI would primarily improve jobs and your work or threaten your jobs and your work, which side of that are you on? And yeah, well, I can't give you the spoiler of that. When we asked our audience at the summit yesterday, there was strong optimism that AI would primarily be a driver of improving jobs and making them more rewarding. And, I think that's an area that maybe healthcare is different from some industries. If you look at some aspects of manufacturing or transport or sectors where there's a lot of routine jobs, and there are sometimes more pessimistic estimates of the impact of AI on jobs. But actually, the consensus, if you look across the kind of modeling and economic work that's done, is that tech and AI will change work in healthcare, absolutely, but won't primarily be leading to large-scale redundancies. They'll be changing the way we work, and if anything, shifting health and care workers more into tasks where humans add more value.
There's a real cliche here that I'm not going to repeat, but I think we'll all have heard it in some form about using AI and not being replaced by AI. So too trite to repeat on this podcast, but no, it's been super interesting. Thank you, Tim, for chatting through this with us. For anyone who's been waiting for the stories, we're not going to let you down. So let's jump into our first story, which comes to us from Healthtech World. AI outperforms clinical tests at predicting Alzheimer's diagnosis. So this is news from the University of Cambridge, where researchers have developed an AI tool that claims to have outperformed traditional clinical methods in predicting the progression of Alzheimer's disease. So using cognitive tests and MRI scans, the AI can predict with over 80% accuracy whether a person with mild cognitive issues will develop Alzheimer's and how quickly. If it could be taken from research to a more, in practice and in progress form, this kind of technology could reduce the need for expensive invasive tests and help patients get the right care earlier. Definitely a win for, I guess, both patients and healthcare systems. So, I mean, I think we've all had a little look at this. My sort of immediate pieces, we've seen quite a lot of stories sort of recently in terms of the studies about how effective AI can be at prediction. This is, I think, based off several hundred bits of data, which is good. It's impressive. How do we get technologies like this to scale? I mean, we've touched on part of it already this call, but I think there are a lot of conversations and a lot of studies coming out about how it could help. How do we make sure that they do help?
Yeah, I found this a really exciting study and an exciting development. As you say, the use of AI and data analytics to help predict is one of the kind of key functions, key benefits that these tools can offer. When it comes to scaling, though, I mean, the top thing in my mind was this is a model built on data from 400 patients and then, yes, validated on several hundreds more, which is great. That's still a pretty small cohort of individuals. And if we're thinking about scaling that, I guess a key question will be, what are the kind of data sets, what kind of size of data set is going to be required to have confidence with using this on different populations and diverse populations. So hugely exciting development and great that it's worked. For me, thinking about the scaling challenge, actually testing it and validating it with larger cohorts and wider populations is going to be really key.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think of that validation piece and it brings to mind clinical trials and how we test and develop drugs. And you start with a small proof of concept, you go to larger studies, eventually you trial it on humans. And I wonder if that's a place that will eventually meet with AI and with this more kind of development of digital health technologies is a much more sort of clear process of this is what's expected before we go to market, just so you can prove that clinical impact. But yeah, like the numbers are small. But one of the things that I thought was really nice and interesting about this study is, so it was developed in a small group, like I said, 400 people, and then tested with some longitudinal data. And the idea being that this means that they can look at data points in time and then use that to validate the algorithm and then use it to sort of see like, well, we're going to try and predict, does it work? And they've shown that, yes, it outperforms the standard of care in predicting whether someone will progress onto dementia or Alzheimer's if they are exhibiting signs of memory loss. But also, and this kind of loops into the other discussion in a more roundabout way, which is it's not just about identifying the people that do have Alzheimer's and could benefit from that early treatment, which is obviously great because we know that people do benefit from being on treatment at as early a stage as possible with Alzheimer's and dementia. But it's also about identifying the people who do not and who are presenting with their doctors with memory loss or other symptoms and actually are found to not be a risk of a progression onto Alzheimer's or dementia. And actually that's probably linked to other conditions such as, I think they mentioned here, depression and things like that, which could also lead to similar symptoms, but obviously have a very, very, very different treatment regimen. So it's kind of, it's part of that bigger conversation as well, which is how does it help us make good decisions, which not only funnels the people into the next stage if they need it, but also freeing up that capacity across the healthcare system so that not only do the people get the support that they need straight away, but also the healthcare system isn't then having to support someone through an Alzheimer diagnosis to then get to the end and find they do not have it. So really freeing up that space at the beginning so that then the clinical leads, the doctors, whomever is overseeing it are free to treat the people who do need their support. So that's why I thought this kind of gives lots of hope across the system because it's allowing people to present, it's giving hopefully predictions that are really reliable, obviously validated by doctors and things like that, but then really, really helping sort of get people funneled to where they need to be sooner.
So I guess the barriers to taking this forward then are going to be twofold, aren't they? It's going to be the access to data questions, and that kind of taps into a lot of the work that you've been doing in the kind of data infrastructure area, Tim. And then the funding piece, once you've been able to access this data, it's getting funding for this particular project to take it forward, to trial it even further with larger data sets and find it go. When there are so many projects, how do we make those determinations? How do we get that data and bring in that funding?
It's a good question. There's only a certain amount of funding to go around. It's why it's really important in terms of public sector investment in research and innovation. It's really important that we're funding research on the basis of excellence, and we have good systems for assessing and prioritizing research. But I see, when I look at stories on Healthtech, and you see the amounts being invested by industry in developing new technologies as well, it makes you realize that the huge amount of resources that are required to do that, and that private sector investment will be essential too.
Well, that brings us on nicely to our final story, which is from Open Access Government. Digital health needs women at the heart of it. So this obviously looks at a number of health data, health innovation biases that have perpetuated in medicine due to women's exclusion from healthcare, and some of the workforce issues and progression of women in health tech and health innovation as well. Tim, you've had a read of this. What do you think?
Yeah, this was a story saying that digital health needs women at the heart of it, arguing that historically there have been biases in health that have perhaps neglected women's health issues. The menopause would be a good example. Actually, over the last 10 years in the UK, there's been more of a push to improve menopause care, but I guess it's speaking to that position of historic neglect. And this article's saying, we need to make sure digital health doesn't unfold in that way. And as you said, Belle, a key part of that is ensuring that we are developing technology, and particularly AI models with representative data sets, so we don't get that bias. For this article, it's arguing that in the context of women, but there are many characteristics that we need to worry about that in terms of. When I read it, actually, it reminded me of a project we're funding at the Health Foundation, which is looking at retinal scans, particularly diabetic retinopathy, and actually, historically, those models have not worked so well for different ethnic groups. And so it's a project we're funding to try to build models for analysing those scans based on more representative data sets. So it's a huge challenge, and I really enjoyed this piece. And just finally, the other thing this piece was arguing, it was a need for more women in tech industry and in AI industry as a way of avoiding that bias. I think it's well known that those who work in tech development and AI development aren't necessarily representative of society as a whole, and a key way of ensuring that this stuff is developed in ways that is sensitive to the needs of different groups is if those involved in doing it themselves look like the populations they're intended to serve.
Yeah, I think one of the this article opens by talking about how historically medicine has excluded women at various points from clinical trials, from research, from the fact of minimizing women's pain, things like that. And that has been because historically medicine has been led by men and developed by men. They've been the ones putting money into the research trials. They've been the ones carrying them out. They've been the ones then doing, medical practice. So now we are at this really amazing kind of, the new frontier, as it were, of AI and digital health. And it's a really great opportunity for us to draw a line in the sand, to be like, look, we have learnt from that. Let's not continue to let it perpetuate through, the new bit of healthcare, because all the stuff we're doing now is going to be the foundation of what digital health will be going forward, and making sure that algorithms don't, like you said earlier, exclude populations or represent the populations that they're going to be serving is one thing, but also making sure, you have diverse teams that are able to call that out and just be aware of it. Because yes, let's not lie, historically, when lots of white men are in a room, they don't necessarily think about the other sorts of people that are going to be using that service, medicine, technology, whatever that may be, because that's not their lived experience. So it's really, really, really important that diversity is a core part. And I think we are so lucky in many ways that we have these learnings and are able right now to say, look, we know that if we ignore this, there are going to be issues in the way that people are treated in the future. So we need to make sure we hold ourselves responsible for that. And often that is, let's bring someone else into the room, let's make sure someone checks it. But also, I think as well, if we do look forward to how this might be approved through regulatory processes and things in the future, it's ensuring there are checkpoints from external people as well to make sure that any sort of algorithm that is being developed for medical purposes have those checkpoints, are proven to be validated across wide data sets and proven to be tested in them as well, because it's not just a case of using diverse data, it's also making sure that we're then testing on that as well, because populations vary so massively, both at the local scale and larger. So I think it's an optimistic time in many ways. Like, let's make sure that we do the good thing. We have learned from centuries of, not including women in trials, let alone women of colour, women of other ethnic minorities. How do we make sure that that doesn't continue?
I think that's right, and it's the best guarantee of that is us being sensitive to it as an issue, and it's why I thought this was an important article. I suppose as a footnote to this, I'd just add though that it's really essential we're considering the inequalities issues and how we're going to avoid those. But I think it's also important just to hold in mind the huge potential health technology and AI have for tackling inequalities. So many of the uses of technology I'm seeing, whether it's remote care, helping people with mobility problems, or translation, helping people with language barriers, auto-translation, or subtitles, large print, the list would go on. These uses of technology have the ability to transform and massively improve the experience of care for people who've historically faced huge barriers. So I think, just to finish in a kind of glass half full kind of way, it's remembering just the huge potential of technology to tackle those inequalities, as well as the risks we need to be sensitive to as it's developed.
I love that.
Agreed. Well, we shall draw it to a close there. Thank you, Belle, and thank you, Tim, for that. It's been a fascinating conversation today. Really appreciated having the opportunity to run through it all with you. We will include links to all the stories and everything we've discussed from the Health Foundation in the newsletter going out this weekend. You can also find the best jobs, podcasts and events in health tech in that newsletter. That's healthtechpigeon.com. We'll be back next week. Thank you for listening.